A cold wind rattled through the cedar boards of my backyard fence the morning I caught HOA President Karen crouching with a power drill in her manicured hand. She wasn't even being subtle about it. Her floral blouse flapped in the wind as wood shavings scattered like confetti. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. But no. Karen was actually boring perfect 1-inch holes into my newly stained fence. When she saw me, she didn't even flinch. She just smirked and said, "We need better airflow between lots. HOA Regulation 4C. That was the moment I realized I was living next to a tyrant armed with cordless tools. I'd moved into Maple Creek Estates 6 months earlier, a quiet suburban development where every lawn was the same height, every mailbox the same color, and every neighbor terrified of violating one of Karen's endless aesthetic rules. She'd been HOA president for 3 years, a self-appointed guardian of suburban uniformity. My first offense? Painting my back gate a darker shade of walnut than approved medium cedar. I'd laughed at the violation notice taped to my door, but the humor vanished when I learned she'd fine me $75. Still, I'd tried to be civil. Until now. "Karen," I called, crossing my yard. "Why are you drilling holes in my fence?" Her tone was syrupy sweet. "It's for airflow. The board decided your fence is creating a stagnant microclimate. Moisture builds up, which could spread mold. You wouldn't want to damage community property, would you?" Community property. My fence. I built it, stained it, maintained it. I recorded her on my phone as she proudly finished another hole. "You're trespassing, Karen." "Not if it's for HOA safety inspection," she said, shouldering her drill like a rifle. "Expect a notice about your non-compliant structure soon." She walked off, heels crunching gravel, leaving behind a row of perfect circular holes like bullet wounds. I stood staring through one of them straight into her yard, where she'd recently installed a pollinator garden that looked suspiciously like weeds. That night, I patched the holes with wooden plugs. The next morning, they were drilled open again. Fresh sawdust glittered on my grass. Karen had come back. I filed a complaint to the HOA board, no response. I emailed again, attaching photos and a video. Still nothing. The next evening, I got an envelope in my mailbox. Notice of fine, unauthorized alteration to shared boundary structure, $150. I laughed out loud. Shared boundary structure? She was fining me for fixing the holes she made. When I confronted her at her driveway, she adjusted her sunglasses and said, "Fighting the HOA only makes things harder. You're new here. I suggest you learn how we do things." That line sat with me all night. Learn how we do things. It wasn't about fences or airflow. It was control. She wanted obedience. So I decided to give her exactly what she wanted, her airflow. But not the kind she expected. A week later, during a Saturday garage cleaning, I noticed a small hornet nest tucked behind a toolbox. My first instinct was to destroy it, but an idea slithered into my mind. Karen's garden was teeming with sugary flowers, the kind hornets love, and she'd just created perfect little tunnels through my fence, tunnels that led directly to her yard. I did some research. Turns out, hornets are territorial and will expand into nearby cavities if they find suitable shelter. My fence holes? Ideal spots. So I carefully relocated the small nest into one of the lower holes using a jar and gloves, sealing the other side temporarily with mesh so they could acclimate. Within 2 days, the hornets had settled. By the 4th day, they'd built extensions into 2 more holes. Then I removed the mesh. Karen noticed the buzzing before I did. From my kitchen window, I saw her step outside in her signature wide-brim hat, carrying a watering can. She bent to inspect her petunias and froze mid-pour. A low hum filled the air. She looked up, eyes widening. A hornet drifted inches from her cheek. Then another. She yelped, dropped the can, and bolted back inside. I pretended not to notice. The next morning, she marched to my door wearing oversized sunglasses and a floppy hat like a celebrity avoiding paparazzi. "There's a hornet infestation near your fence," she said, voice trembling with false composure. The HOA will hold you responsible for any stings. I feigned concern. That's terrible. Maybe it's because of all those airflow holes? Insects love open wood cavities. Her jaw twitched. You need to remove them immediately. I'd love to, I said, but the HOA ruled that airflow is required, remember? She stormed off, muttering something about pest control. I watched from the window as she made several frantic phone calls. An hour later, a pest control van rolled up. 2 guys in suits approached her fence cautiously. One peered through a hole, and instantly jerked back as hornets erupted in a swarm. They sprinted, flailing their arms, while Karen screamed from her porch. The technicians refused to continue without an additional fee for hazard conditions. The following day, she sent another fine, this time $200 for environmental hazard creation. I sent back a polite letter asking for clarification, citing her airflow mandate and referencing HOA Bylaw 4C. I even copied the rest of the board. No response. By week's end, Karen had barricaded her side of the fence with plastic sheeting. The sight was glorious, my overbearing neighbor's backyard wrapped like a quarantine zone. She looked defeated, pacing her deck in rubber gloves. I thought that would be the end of it. But Karen doesn't lose quietly. 2 days later, I returned home to find a fresh notice taped to my door. Mandatory fence replacement. Failure to comply with HOA guidelines may result in legal action. Attached was a quote from a contractor, her cousin of course, for $2,300. That night, I checked my security cameras. At 2:11 a.m., Karen appeared on screen wearing a raincoat, flashlight in hand, inspecting the fence again. She reached into one of the Hornet holes with a stick, poked it, and instantly bolted as a dark cloud exploded around her. The footage showed her sprinting toward her porch, swatting wildly, dropping her flashlight. I couldn't stop laughing. The next morning, the HOA group email lit up. Urgent. Possible insect infestation spreading from Lot 14. Karen was demanding an emergency meeting. I replied with a single line. Suggest investigating cause, possible breach of airflow containment integrity. Half the neighborhood showed up to watch the spectacle when the pest control team returned in full suit. They smoked out the fence line, revealing a thriving colony that had expanded into 3 adjoining panels. When they informed Karen that the nest originated from the drilled structural openings, she went pale. The HOA's insurance wouldn't cover self-inflicted property damage, nor would her own homeowner's policy once they saw the video I anonymously sent showing her drilling the holes. By evening, she was screaming on her phone near her mailbox. I caught snippets. No, it was his fence. I had authorization. Don't you hang up on me. For the first time since I'd moved in, my yard felt peaceful. The hornets were gone, Karen was cornered, and the board had quietly suspended all airflow regulations pending review. Still, I knew her kind. Karen wasn't done. She'd lick her wounds, gather allies, and come back twice as loud. So when I saw her out the next morning, wearing oversized sunglasses to hide what looked suspiciously like stings along her temple, I simply waved. She didn't wave back. But she did glare at my fence with pure, simmering hatred. And that was the moment I decided. This war had just begun. Karen avoided me for exactly 3 days after the Hornet fiasco. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd finally learned to mind her own business. But when I stepped outside on the 4th morning, I saw a neon orange construction notice staked in my front yard. Property under review by Maple Creek HOA, unauthorized modifications detected. I stared at it, half laughing, half stunned. Unauthorized modifications? Of what, oxygen? I walked the perimeter, expecting to find something tangible, but the only change was that someone, Karen, obviously, had sprayed little pink dots along the bottom of my fence post, every 6 feet, like she was marking a crime scene. I didn't bother calling the HOA office. It was Sunday. I went straight to the source. Karen was pruning her pollinator garden, wearing thick gloves, sunglasses, and a scarf tied under her chin like she was in witness protection. I approached the fence, arms crossed. "Care to explain the crime scene tape in my yard?" I asked. She didn't look up. "Those are survey markers. The HOA suspects your fence is 6 inches over the boundary line. It'll need to be removed and rebuilt correctly." 6 inches. 6 inches after the Hornet incident. The woman was unhinged. "Karen," I said, trying to keep my tone even, "the survey was done by the developer. The line hasn't moved. You're wasting your time." She clipped a dead flower with surgical precision. "We'll see what the board says." That line again, like she was the judge, jury, and executioner of fence-related crimes. I smiled, turned on my heel, and went inside. Time to play the long game again. That evening, I pulled up the official HOA charter. Buried deep in the rules was a clause allowing residents to request a private boundary inspection, one overseen by an independent third-party surveyor, not the HOA's internal compliance committee. It required a $75 processing fee and a written statement of concern. Perfect. I filed the request, attached a copy of Karen's unauthorized drilling video for context, and waited. The next morning, I caught Karen at her mailbox when she got the email notification. I could hear her frustrated little gasp from across the street. "You can't just go over the board's head," she snapped. "Of course I can," I said. "It's in the bylaws, Section 8, Paragraph 2. You've read them, right?" Her lips pressed into a thin, furious line. The surveyor came 2 days later. A cheerful guy named Mike with a truck full of gear. Karen hovered nearby pretending to water her roses, but she was really eavesdropping. Mike and I walked the line together, checking the property stake. After about an hour, he looked up and said, "Looks good to me. Your fence is exactly where it should be, actually, hers is a few inches over." Karen froze. "That can't be right." Mike shrugged. "I'll send the full report to the HOA this afternoon." For once, she was speechless. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. That night, I poured a whiskey and watched from my deck as she stormed around her yard, flashlight in hand, measuring tape trailing like a snake. Her muttering carried across the fence. "No, no, no, that's impossible." By morning, she'd escalated again. Another notice taped to my door. Violation, failure to maintain fence appearance. This time, she'd included printed photos of the Hornet damage. Board decision pending, full repaint or replacement required. I laughed so hard I nearly choked. She was flailing now, grasping for anything to justify her authority. But I noticed something new in the photos. A glint of black plastic near the top edge of one shot. It looked suspiciously like a camera. I scanned my fence the next day and found it. A tiny wireless camera tucked beneath one of the top slats, aimed directly at my backyard. I yanked it free and checked the sticker on the side. K. Adler Property Security System. Unbelievable. She'd planted surveillance cameras. I called the local sheriff's office. The deputy who showed up was a stocky guy named Harlan who'd probably seen enough HOA nonsense to write a book. I handed him the camera. He examined it, whistled low. "This transmitting?" "Yup. Signal's active. Probably feeds to her phone." He sighed. "That's illegal surveillance. I'll handle it." 10 minutes later, he was knocking on Karen's door. I watched from my porch as she tried to sweet-talk him, but Harlan wasn't buying it. He pointed at the camera, spoke firmly, and finally handed her a pink slip of paper. She went pale, clutching it like a death warrant. When he left, she glared across the street at me, eyes full of venom. Then she retreated inside, slamming the door. For the next 2 days, Maple Creek was silent. No emails. No fines. No sightings of Karen. It was eerie. Even the usual dog walkers seemed to sense something brewing. Then, late Thursday night, the war resumed. At exactly 11:47 p.m., my security lights flicked on. I glanced out the window just in time to see Karen and another man, probably her cousin the contractor, hauling wooden boards toward the fence. They were replacing the damaged panels from their side, hammering furiously, whispering back and forth. By the time I got outside, half the section had been covered with fresh, unpainted wood on my fence. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. Karen jumped, hammer in hand. "Fixing community property," she barked. "The HOA authorized it." "At midnight," she stammered. "We, had to act quickly before the weekend rain." Her accomplice kept his head down. I recognized him from her earlier contractor quote. "Step away from my fence," I said, pulling out my phone. "You're trespassing again. And this time, you're doing it on camera." She hesitated, then dropped the hammer and marched off in a huff. "You'll regret this. The board will hear about your aggression." When they were gone, I walked closer to inspect the work, and nearly laughed out loud. Her repairs had sealed several Hornet exit holes on her side, but left them open on mine. If any remnants of the colony remained inside the wood, they'd find a way out. Straight into her yard again. I didn't touch a thing. 2 days later, on Saturday morning, I was awakened by a shriek so loud it sounded like a murder scene. I ran outside and saw Karen flailing in her backyard, a cloud of hornets swirling around her head. She tripped over a flower pot, fell backward into her garden hose, and rolled across the mulch, screaming. Her husband came running out with a towel, trying to swat them away, but it only made things worse. By the time they scrambled inside, she was covered in red welt. I didn't celebrate outwardly, but I may have smiled just a little. That afternoon, an emergency HOA meeting was called at the clubhouse. I attended, sitting quietly in the back while Karen, her face blotchy and swollen, presented a slideshow titled, "Insect-Related Safety Concerns at Maple Creek Estates." She blamed my refusal to cooperate for her personal injuries. The irony was so thick you could butter toast with it. Then, mid-presentation, Vice President Nolan interrupted. "Karen, we reviewed the footage Mr. Pierce submitted," he said, nodding at me. "The one showing you drilling into his fence. It seems the infestation originated from those holes. So the board's position is that this was self-inflicted." Karen's mouth fell open. "You can't be serious." Furthermore, Nolan continued, "Your unauthorized late-night repair attempt violated community noise regulations. You'll be fined accordingly." The room went silent. Then someone snorted. Another chuckled. Within seconds, half the board was laughing. Even Nolan couldn't hide a grin. Karen stood up, trembling. "You're all against me. This is corruption." She stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the projector wobbled. When the meeting adjourned, Nolan pulled me aside. "Between us," he said, "everyone's tired of her power trips. You just gave us the excuse to finally vote her out." By sunset, word had spread. An emergency ballot was being organized to elect a new HOA president. I spent the evening on my porch with a beer, listening to the quiet hum of crickets where hornets once buzzed. For the first time, Maple Creek felt like home. Across the street, Karen's curtains stayed closed, but her porch light burned late into the night. I could almost picture her pacing inside, plotting her next move. And I knew there'd be one. Karen was the kind of person who didn't know how to lose gracefully. Sure enough, just before midnight, I got a notification from my outdoor camera. Motion detected near fence line. I opened the feed. There she was again. Hood up, flashlight clutched in one hand, muttering under her breath as she measured the fence post. Then she crouched and started digging near the corner stake. I leaned back, smiling to myself. Whatever she was planning next, she was digging her own hole now, literally. And I was more than ready for round 3. By Monday morning, the neighborhood group chat was on fire. Word had spread faster than gossip at a church bake sale. Karen Adler lost control of the HOA meeting. Screenshots of her storming out were circulating like trading cards. Someone even made a meme of her pointing angrily at the projector with the caption, "When your Hornet plan backfires." I didn't make it, but I sure as hell saved it. For a brief, shining moment, Maple Creek felt almost free. No passive-aggressive notes on doors. No arbitrary fines. People were actually smiling at each other. Even the usually grumpy mailman whistled while delivering the morning post. Then came the smell. It started faintly, an odd, musty odor wafting from the fence line between my yard and Karen's. By the second day, it was unbearable, like damp compost mixed with sour milk. When I went to investigate, I found a trench, 2 feet deep, running along the base of the fence. She'd actually dug up the soil between our properties. The loose dirt suggested she'd been at it for hours, maybe over multiple nights. I knew why. She was trying to expose the property markers to prove her boundary claim. But the trench was uneven, full of stagnant water from the last rainstorm. And worse, she'd somehow nicked into the drainage pipe that ran beneath both properties. I crouched down, sniffed. The smell wasn't just mud, it was gray water. By afternoon, half my backyard was soggy. My dog, Duke, came back from sniffing the area looking like he'd rolled in a swamp. That's when I called the county inspector. He arrived in a county truck, clipboard in hand. Karen emerged from her porch as if summoned by dark magic, immediately intercepting him. "You can't investigate that area," she said, hands on hips. "It's HOA jurisdiction." The inspector frowned. "Ma'am, this is a county drainage pipe. If it's damaged, that's my jurisdiction. Then you'll need to coordinate through me. I'm on the board." I leaned on the fence. "Former board," I corrected. The inspector gave her a long look. "Right. Anyway, I'll just take a look at the pipe." Karen followed him like a hawk while he crouched, poked at the mud, and shone his flashlight down the hole. Finally, he stood, brushing off his knees. "Yep. Someone broke the pipe. That's gonna cause backflow. We'll need to dig it up and repair it." Karen gasped. "You mean he broke it?" The inspector pointed directly at the shovel leaning against her fence. "Looks like your tool." I couldn't resist. "Looks like your trench too." She went crimson. "This is sabotage." "Tell it to the county," I said, smiling. When the repair team arrived the next day, they tore up the trench completely, on her side of the property. Turns out, the pipe damage was entirely within her boundary. The total cost? $1,900, payable by the homeowner responsible. The look on her face when they handed her the invoice was worth every minute of hassle. But the real fallout came later that week. The HOA election results were posted on everyone's door. Karen had officially lost the presidency. Vice President Nolan was promoted to interim chair. His first act? Announcing a moratorium on homeowner fines pending procedural review. Translation: Karen's power trip was officially over. The neighborhood threw an impromptu barbecue to celebrate. I showed up with a cooler of beer and a stack of burgers. Everyone was laughing, relaxed, happy for once. Halfway through, Nolan clinked his glass and said, "To new beginnings, and fewer Hornets." The crowd erupted in laughter. But one person didn't laugh. From across the street, Karen stood at her window, blinds half drawn, glaring out like a ghost haunting her own home. Her porch light flickered on and off, as if signaling Morse code for vengeance. I figured she'd cool off eventually. I was wrong. 2 nights later, I woke to Duke barking like mad. I pulled on my robe, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was heavy with the smell of gasoline. My stomach dropped. I followed the scent around the side of the house and froze. A thin, oily sheen glistened across the ground near my fence line. The grass was soaked. The air stung my nose. Someone had poured fuel into the trench. I immediately shut off my outdoor lights and backed away, heart pounding. One spark, one cigarette, and my yard would have gone up like a torch. I called the fire department. They arrived within 10 minutes, lights flashing, hoses spraying down the area. Luckily, no ignition, just contamination. But the fire chief took it seriously. He called in the sheriff. Deputy Harlan showed up again, this time with a more serious expression. "You got security footage?" "Yeah," I said, pulling it up on my phone. The grainy night vision showed a figure in a hooded coat walking along the fence, carrying a large red gas can. She paused several times, bending over the trench. Then, right before leaving, she turned toward the camera, and for a split second, her face caught the light. Karen. Harlan exhaled. That's enough for a warrant. By morning, the whole neighborhood knew. Sheriff's cars parked in front of her house, deputies at her door. She tried to play innocent, of course, shouting about fabricated evidence and digital tampering. But when they pulled the gas can from her shed, still half full and reeking of the same fuel, her defense fell apart. They didn't arrest her. Arson requires intent to ignite. But they did issue a hefty citation and a restraining order preventing her from entering within 20 feet of my property line. That evening, as they left, she stood on her porch, face pale and furious, shouting, "You've destroyed this community. You and your Hornets." The deputies ignored her. I just waved. The next week was pure bliss. My yard dried out, the air cleared, and the HOA finally felt normal again. Nolan even stopped by to personally apologize for letting things get out of hand. "Don't worry about it," I said. "Karen was just passionate." "Psychotic," he corrected, grinning. "But we're cleaning house. You won't have to deal with her again." I wanted to believe that. Really, I did. But 2 nights later, a single envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note on floral stationery. It read, "You think you've won. But I'm not finished. Watch your fence." The handwriting was unmistakable, aggressive, sharp, and all caps. Karen's. I laughed when I first read it. But then, later that night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like a footstep. Every rustle outside made Duke growl. I checked the cameras twice before going to bed. At dawn, I went out to check the fence again, and found something new. Tiny holes. Not drilled this time, but burned. The wood was blackened, edges charred, like someone had poked it with a heated metal rod. About a dozen of them ran along the same stretch where the hornet nests had once been. For a moment, I just stared. The absurdity of it all almost made me laugh again. Then I realized what it meant. Karen wasn't breaking the restraining order directly. She was using someone else. Sure enough, later that afternoon, I spotted her teenage nephew, a lanky kid with a smug grin, kicking around a soccer ball near my driveway. When he thought I wasn't looking, he wandered toward the fence, pretending to tie his shoe. I caught the faint smell of lighter fluid. I stepped outside. "Hey, sport," I said, voice calm. "Lose something?" He froze, then bolted without a word. That night, I filed another report with Harlan and sent him the footage. He sighed, promising to handle it. But I wasn't waiting around for justice this time. The next morning, I made a trip to the hardware store and bought something new: motion-activated sprinklers, the kind designed to keep deer away. I rigged them along the fence, connected them to my smart home system, and set the sensitivity to maximum. By nightfall, I was ready. Around midnight, the camera pinged again. A figure crept along the fence line, flashlight beam bouncing. Then came a hiss, a click, and whoosh! A pressurized jet of ice-cold water hit him square in the face. The kid screamed, dropped his flashlight, and sprinted across the yard. My speakers automatically blared the warning message I'd programmed: "Property protected. Trespassers will be reported." Karen came running out in her robe, shouting his name. The sprinklers turned on again, soaking them both. I watched the whole thing live from my phone, sipping coffee like it was a movie. The next morning, the police were back again. This time, Karen didn't even argue. She just stood there dripping wet from the previous night's incident, hands trembling as Harlan handed her another citation. Her face, her yard, her reputation, all crumbling, one act of pettiness at a time. And as I watched her retreat inside, I couldn't help but think, for someone obsessed with control, Karen was falling apart beautifully. But somehow, deep down, I knew she still had one card left to play. And whatever it was, she was saving it for me. The day after the sprinkler showdown, Maple Creek felt like it had finally exhaled. The air was quiet again, almost suspiciously so. No drills, no hammering, no HOA letters taped to doors. Even the birds seemed to be singing louder. For a whole 48 hours, Karen's name didn't come up once in the neighborhood chat. People were joking that she'd gone into hiding. But I knew better. Karen didn't disappear, she regrouped. It started small. Little signs of intrusion that didn't make sense. My mailbox flag would be up when I hadn't sent anything. My trash bins were mysteriously overturned on collection day. The morning paper, something I never even subscribed to, would suddenly appear on my porch, wrapped in a plastic sleeve with the front page circled in red marker. Community pride at risk, one headline said. Another read, Neighborhood standards decline. I didn't need to check the handwriting to know who was behind it. Karen was waging psychological warfare. I ignored it for a week, but on the 8th day, I got home from work to find something new. A bright yellow sign staked into my front lawn. It read, Pest infestation under investigation, keep back. It had the HOA logo, but the print quality was terrible. I yanked it up, flipped it over, and found a small handwritten note taped to the back. Enjoy living with your bugs. That was it. Game on again. That night, I took a walk around the neighborhood with Duke. The sun was setting, and most porches were glowing orange under their lights. I could see Karen's silhouette through her curtains, pacing, phone in hand, gesturing wildly. I imagined she was calling her cousin again, plotting some legal maneuver to reclaim her lost throne. When I got back, I found something else waiting for me. A motion alert from my security system. The footage showed a white van stopping near my driveway, its hazard lights blinking. 2 figures got out, one carrying a spray tank, the other holding a clipboard. They looked around nervously, then began misting something along the fence line, on my side. I grabbed my flashlight and bolted out the door. Hey! What do you think you're doing? They froze like kids caught tagging a wall. The older one stammered, Pest control, ma'am. Called in by the HOA. I frowned. The HOA has no jurisdiction on my property. Who called you? He hesitated. Mrs. Adler. Of course. I showed him my ID and said, You're trespassing. Turn that off now. They apologized, packed up, and drove off, leaving a chemical smell in the air. I called Nolan, the new HOA chair, and told him what happened. He sounded exhausted. I'll handle it, he said. We thought stripping her of president duties would calm her down. Clearly not. It didn't. The next morning, my grass was dying. A wide brown stripe ran along the entire fence, exactly where they'd sprayed. The once green blades had turned brittle and gray overnight. I knelt and picked a handful. They crumbled like ash between my fingers. She hadn't just tried to humiliate me. She'd poisoned my lawn. I took pictures, filed a police report, and sent a copy to Nolan. Then I sat at my kitchen table, hands clasped, staring out the window at the fence line. My fence, this stupid wooden barrier, had become the front line of a suburban Cold War. I thought back to the first time I met Karen. She'd come over with a plate of cookies and a clipboard, introducing herself as Maple Creek's community liaison. She'd smiled, asked about my occupation, my car, my plans for yard maintenance, all before I'd even finished unpacking boxes. Her friendliness had felt like an interview. Maybe it was. Maybe she'd been assessing how easy I'd be to control. Not anymore. That afternoon I made some calls. A friend of mine from college worked in pest control. Real pest control, not the HOA-sanctioned kind. I explained my situation, leaving out the Hornet details. He laughed so hard I had to wait for him to catch his breath. You want deterrence? Easy. I'll send you something special. 2 days later, a package arrived. A discreet brown box labeled BioRepel B14, Organic Insect Deterrent. Inside were several sealed containers and a note that said, Safe for humans and pets. Smells like hell. Works like magic. Perfect. I waited until sunset, when most of the neighborhood was inside watching TV. Then I mixed the solution according to the instructions, poured it into a sprayer, and walked the entire length of the fence, on my side, of course, coating every board in a thin layer. The smell hit almost immediately, part vinegar, part ammonia, part something dead. My eyes watered. Duke sneezed twice and fled inside. But by morning, every bug in a 5-foot radius had vanished. And yet, the best part wasn't the bug control, it was Karen's reaction. At 9 a.m., she came storming into her yard wearing a surgical mask, holding a measuring tape and a spray bottle of her own. She took one breath, gagged, and doubled over coughing. "What is that stench?" she yelled over the fence. "Natural repellent," I called back cheerfully. "Totally HOA approved. Organic too." She squinted, eyes watering. "You're gassing the neighborhood." "Just protecting community property," I said, throwing her own words back at her. "You wouldn't want another Hornet situation, would you?" She stomped off, muttering something about chemical warfare. But that night, she got creative again. I was reading in the living room when Duke's low growl started up. The outdoor lights flicked on. Through the window, I saw movement near the fence, shadows darting back and forth. Then came the unmistakable sound of scraping. I grabbed my flashlight and ran outside. Karen's nephew again, this time with a trowel, was trying to smear something along the bottom of the boards. He froze when my beam hit him. His hands were covered in what looked like peanut butter. "What the hell are you doing?" I barked. He stammered, It's for the raccoons." "What raccoons?" He bolted. The next morning, I found out what he meant. The smell of rotting trash hit me before I reached the yard. My security feed showed at least 3 raccoons clawing and tearing at the fence overnight, drawn in by the peanut butter paste. The boards were scratched, the grass torn up, one corner post leaning. Karen had unleashed wildlife on me now. I took the footage to Nolan, who was running out of patience. "She's violating a restraining order." "Again," he said, rubbing his temples. "I'll talk to the board. Maybe we can force mediation or even file a cease and desist through legal counsel." But before that could happen, Karen made her boldest move yet. It was Friday night. I came home to find a massive tarp stretched across her yard, right against the fence. Underneath it, I could hear a steady humming noise, low, mechanical, constant. When I looked over the top, my jaw dropped. She'd installed a row of industrial air purifiers, the kind used in workshops or construction sites. They were blowing directly at my property, full blast. A storm of dust, leaves, and debris whipped through my yard. The noise was deafening. I marched straight to her porch and pounded on the door. "Karen, turn it off." She opened the door just enough to glare out. "I'm counteracting your chemical fumes." "You're welcome. You're blowing half the neighborhood into my yard." "File a complaint," she said, and shut the door. So I did. 3, actually, 1 to the HOA, 1 to the sheriff, and 1 to the environmental office. By Sunday, county inspectors were back. They measured noise levels, airflow, and particulate matter. When they discovered that her purifiers exceeded residential decibel limits and were dumping contaminated air onto adjoining property, they slapped her with a violation notice and a $1,200 fine. Her face when she read it? Priceless. She ripped down the tarp in fury that same evening, shouting into her phone as she did. I watched from my deck with a beer, Duke at my feet, enjoying the spectacle. But the peace didn't last. Later that night, as I locked up, I noticed something glinting under my porch light. A small black envelope taped to the door. Inside was a single piece of paper, no words, just a printed image, a hornet's nest. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't a threat in the usual sense. It was a message. A warning. A promise that the battle wasn't over. And as much as I hated to admit it, I felt a strange mix of adrenaline and anticipation. Because if Karen wanted another round, I was already 3 moves ahead. By the time Monday rolled around, Maple Creek looked less like a neighborhood and more like a Cold War buffer zone. Neighbors avoided eye contact when walking their dogs, sprinklers were timed to spray only within property lines, and everyone double-checked their security cameras before bedtime. The HOA message board had gone eerily quiet. Nobody dared mention the word Hornet anymore. It was as if the entire community was collectively holding its breath, waiting to see who'd make the next move, me or Karen. It didn't take long to find out. That morning, I walked outside to find my mailbox door hanging open and a neatly folded paper inside. It was an official HOA memo, but the signature was what made me laugh. Interim Compliance Officer Karen Adler. She'd found a way back in. Technically, she was no longer president, but she'd wriggled onto some subcommittee that Nolan probably hadn't realized existed. The memo accused me of maintaining a hostile environment and warned that continued disruption may result in escalation to the regional HOA authority. I didn't even know there was a regional HOA authority. I doubted it existed. But Karen didn't need reality, she needed authority. I poured myself a coffee, sat on the porch, and read the memo aloud to Duke. Hostile environment, huh? Guess she's finally self-aware. That afternoon, Nolan stopped by with a weary look on his face. She's been emailing everyone non-stop, he said. Claims you're violating some air quality rule. From my organic repellent? He shrugged. Her new angle is that it's biohazardous discharge. The woman sent me a 6-page PDF titled Fence Fumes, a Community Health Crisis. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Nolan didn't. She's threatening to take it to the county again. Let her, I said. Maybe this time they'll fine her for wasting their time. He nodded, but I could tell he was worried. Look, she's unraveling. Just keep everything documented, okay? That night, I reviewed all my footage again, every incident since the first drilled hole. My external hard drive was basically a documentary of suburban madness. But as I skimmed the latest recordings, I noticed something strange. In the past week, Karen hadn't come near the fence herself. No late-night trespassing, no nephew visits, nothing. She was planning something bigger. Something indirect. The clue came 3 nights later. It was 2 a.m. when the motion alert buzzed my phone. At first, I thought it was another raccoon. But when I opened the live feed, I froze. A pickup truck idled in front of my house, its headlights off, tailgate down. 2 men were unloading something heavy and rectangular, setting it just beyond my driveway. Then they drove off. I grabbed a flashlight and crept outside. The object was a wooden crate, about waist-high, stenciled with the words, Property Storage, HOA Equipment. There was no seal, no paperwork. Just a single padlock, easily pried off with my toolbox. Inside, I found bags of concrete mix, rolls of caution tape, and a metal sign that read, Under renovation, no entry. She was trying to mark off my property as a construction site. The next morning, a few confused neighbors stood on the sidewalk whispering. One of them, Carol from 2 doors down, called out, Are you redoing your driveway? No, I said. Karen's just redecorating reality again. An hour later, a landscaping crew showed up, claiming they'd been hired for fence replacement. The invoice listed the HOA as the payer, but the contact name? Karen Adler. I told them to leave. They refused. We're authorized, the foreman said. We got an order from the compliance officer. I dialed Nolan immediately. You need to come down here. Now. He arrived 20 minutes later, just in time to catch Karen marching up the street with a clipboard in hand, shouting orders like a general in a suburban war zone. You're in violation of Section 9B. The fence must be reconstructed according to HOA standard dimensions. Nolan stepped in front of her. Karen, that section was repealed in 2018. She blinked. No, it wasn't. I wrote the amendment myself, he said. You signed it. She opened her mouth, closed it, then jabbed a finger toward me. He's endangering the neighborhood. He brought hornets, chemicals, wild animals. This fence has been a blight since the day he moved in. I raised an eyebrow. Funny, considering you drilled it yourself. The landscapers shifted uncomfortably. Nolan turned to them. Pack it up, guys. This order's not valid. Karen started shouting as they loaded back into the truck. You'll regret this, Nolan. You're enabling him. But no one was listening. When the truck pulled away, she stood there trembling, her carefully curated facade cracking. You think you've won? She hissed. You're poisoning everything you touch. Then she stormed off. By that night, her revenge was in motion. At 3 a.m., another alert went off. This time, it wasn't movement, it was sound. A shrill, high-pitched buzzing echoed through the feed. It took me a moment to realize what it was. A Hornet trap. She'd installed electric bug zappers along the fence, industrial-grade ones. Blue light flickered through the slats, pulsing like lightning. The noise was constant, a droning hum that made sleep impossible. By morning, I'd had enough. I called the HOA, the county, even animal control. Sorry, they said, as long as it's on her property, it's legal. Legal maybe. But fair? No. So I came up with something new, something poetic. I spent the next 2 days in my garage, tinkering. A friend had given me a set of old motion-triggered garden devices, tiny ultrasonic speakers meant to repel deer and raccoons. I modified them, adjusted the frequency, and placed them strategically along my fence. When the zappers activated at night, the sensors would pick up the vibrations and emit a high-pitched sound, a sound humans could hear perfectly, but only from her side. That night, I turned them on and waited. At 10:03 p.m., the zappers buzzed to life. 10 seconds later, a piercing whine filled the air, rising in pitch like a mosquito trapped in your ear. I stood on my porch pretending to read a book, pretending I didn't hear a thing. From across the yard, I saw her porch light snap on. Then her back door slammed open. "What is that noise?" she screamed. I shrugged. "Don't know, Karen. Maybe it's the sound of airflow through community property." She glared, realizing the echo of her own past words. Then she stomped inside, slamming the door so hard her porch light flickered out. The neighborhood was split between annoyance and delight. Some people thanked me for fighting back. Others just wanted peace. But by Thursday, the sound war had escalated into full chaos. She retaliated by installing motion-activated floodlights, the brightest I'd ever seen. Every time Duke so much as wagged his tail near the fence, her yard lit up like a prison yard. I countered by adjusting my sprinkler timer to spray the fence line every time the lights turned on. The sensors triggered back and forth like dueling sentries. For 2 nights straight, our shared border flashed and hissed like some surreal suburban battlefield. Then came the storm. Friday night brought the first big downpour of the season. Heavy wind, sheets of rain, the kind that makes fences groan. Around midnight, I heard a crash. I ran outside with a flashlight, sloshing through puddles, and there it was. The middle section of the fence had collapsed. I expected damage. I didn't expect what lay underneath. Karen's side of the fence was dug out deeper than before, nearly 3 feet down. And wedged inside the gap were several sealed wooden boxes. Curiosity overrode caution. I pried one open. Inside were glass jars, dozens of them, filled with murky liquid. Labels read, "Hornet repellent, experimental batch." I realized what she'd done. She hadn't been trying to exterminate hornets, she'd been trying to recreate them. The woman was stockpiling chemical bait to lure them back, to prove I was harboring pests. I took photos, called Nolan, and emailed everything to the HOA and county officials. By morning, the whole development was buzzing, not with insects but gossip. When the county inspector arrived, Karen tried to defend herself. "It's research. Preventative action." The inspector held up a jar. "This is an illegal pesticide mixture. You could have killed every pollinator in a mile radius." She went silent. They confiscated the boxes and fined her thousands. By that evening, her yard was stripped bare. Tarp gone, machines gone, boxes gone. Only the fence remained, muddy and broken between us. I stood at the gap, rain still dripping from the eaves, watching her stare at the wreckage. For the first time, she looked small. Not angry, not smug, just defeated. She noticed me, wiped her face, and said softly, "You've ruined everything I built here." "Karen," I said, "you did that yourself." She looked like she wanted to say more, but turned away and went inside, slamming the door one last time. I thought maybe, just maybe, that was the end. But when I checked my phone later that night, a new alert popped up from the HOA portal. Special meeting scheduled. Discussion of property line disputes, requested by K. Adler. Of course, she wasn't done. She was going to drag me into one last public showdown. And for once, I couldn't wait. The special meeting was set for Thursday evening in the Maple Creek Clubhouse, the beige stucco bunker where HOA dreams went to die. I arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in my most neutral outfit, a gray shirt and jeans, the attire of a man who just wanted peace. But as soon as I walked in, I knew this wasn't going to be peaceful. The place was packed. Every folding chair was filled. Neighbors whispered behind their hands, phones angled just enough to record. At the front of the room stood Karen, clipboard clutched in both hands like a holy relic. Her eyes were puffy but sharp, her lips pressed into that thin, dangerous smile she wore when she thought she had the upper hand. Next to her was Nolan, sitting at the head of the table with the exhausted expression of a man who'd aged 10 years in 1 week. He looked at me as if to say, "Brace yourself." "Thank you all for coming," Karen began, tapping her pen for attention. "Tonight's agenda is simple. Property line disputes and the ongoing threats to community safety caused by non-compliant structures and hazardous materials." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew what this was really about. She turned toward me, eyes gleaming. "I'd like to start by addressing Mr. Pierce's fence, which has been the source of multiple neighborhood complaints, chemical incidents, and, most recently, an infestation that endangered community welfare." I raised an eyebrow. "Infestation you created, you mean?" "Excuse me," she snapped. "You'll have your turn to speak." She clicked her remote, and the projector screen behind her flickered to life with a slideshow. Photos of my fence, my yard, even a few of Duke lying in the grass as if he were part of the crime scene. She'd labeled each image. Chemical residue, wildlife damage, excessive moisture. "Moisture," I said aloud. "You mean the rain?" Laughter broke out in the back row. Karen shot daggers at them. "These images," she continued through gritted teeth, "demonstrate a clear pattern of negligence. Mr. Pierce has consistently failed to maintain his property in accordance with HOA standards, despite multiple warnings." I stood up. "Multiple illegal warnings." Nolan sighed. "Let him respond, Karen." I faced the room. "You all remember the Hornet issue, right? The one caused by her drilling holes into my fence? I have video evidence, police reports, and HOA fines that prove exactly who started every single incident since day one." I held up a folder and let it drop onto the table with a satisfying slap. Karen's nostrils flared. "That's harassment. You're stalking me." "Stalking?" I said, laughing. "Karen, you installed cameras on my fence. You poisoned my lawn. You sent men with gas cans into my yard. You've broken at least 3 county ordinances and 1 restraining order." She smirked, a twitchy, desperate thing. "Allegedly." The room erupted in murmurs again. Nolan raised his hand for silence. "We've reviewed the documents Mr. Pierce submitted," he said carefully. "And based on the evidence, the board has decided to issue an official cease and desist order to." Karen cut him off. "No. You can't do that. You don't understand, he's dangerous. He's manipulative. He turned the Hornets on me." The laughter this time wasn't polite, it was uncontrollable. A few people even clapped. Someone whispered, "Here we go again," loud enough for her to hear. Karen's face flushed crimson. "You're all blind. He's making a fool of this community." I stayed quiet. Sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. Finally, Nolan cleared his throat. "That's enough. The board's vote is final. Karen Adler is hereby suspended from all HOA committees and subcommittees effective immediately. The room gasped. She stood frozen for a moment, blinking rapidly, as if trying to process the words. You can't suspend me. You need me. Without me, this neighborhood will fall apart. Then I guess we'll find out, Nolan said. She looked around the room for allies, but none of her former supporters would meet her eyes. One by one, they turned away. Her lip trembled. For a fleeting moment, she looked human. Vulnerable, even. Then she turned her fury back on me. You think this is over? She hissed. You think you can humiliate me in front of everyone and just live here like nothing happened? Karen, I said calmly, you've been humiliating yourself since the first hole you drilled. That broke her. She lunged toward me, knocking over her chair. 2 board members grabbed her arms as she screamed, You'll regret this, Pierce. You'll regret all of it. The meeting disbanded in chaos. Outside, I stood under the dim parking lot lights, listening to crickets and low murmurs as people dispersed. Nolan came up beside me, rubbing his temple. I'm sorry, he said. That was uglier than I expected. I shrugged. It's fine. She'll cool off. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. That night, I checked every lock twice. The air outside was thick and still, the kind of silence that made your skin itch. Around 1 a.m., Duke started growling, low, constant. I grabbed a flashlight and crept to the window. At first, I saw nothing. Then the beam caught movement near the fence. A shadow, moving low and fast. Someone was out there again. I slipped outside, careful not to make noise, and edged toward the back gate. The flashlight beam swept across the grass, and landed on Karen. She was crouched by the broken section of the fence, holding what looked like a spray canister. Karen! I barked. She jumped, nearly dropping it. The nozzle hissed as a mist of chemical vapor drifted into the air. Stay back, she shouted. You don't understand. Put it down. It's Hornet pheromone, she yelled. I'm fixing what you started. I lunged forward, knocking the canister from her hands. It hit the ground and burst open, releasing a sharp, sickly sweet smell. Karen stumbled back, coughing, while I kicked the can away. What the hell is wrong with you? I said. You're trespassing again. Her eyes were wide, tearful, but wild. They took everything from me. My position, my garden, my reputation. You did this. Karen, you did this to yourself. She glared at me for a long moment, then something in her expression shifted. She stepped closer, voice dropping to a trembling whisper. You think you're clever. But I'm not finished. This neighborhood needs me. Then she turned and ran into the night. By the time the sheriff arrived, she was gone. They searched her house the next day, found it half empty. Drawers open, clothes missing, a few bags gone. But what caught everyone's attention was the garage. Inside were dozens of jars, just like the ones we'd found before, labeled with chemical names and experimental notes. The hazmat team took them away. Nolan told me later she'd been cited again for illegal storage of volatile substances. She'd fled before they could serve her the paperwork. For a week, Maple Creek fell silent. The quiet was heavy but oddly peaceful. People smiled again. The air smelled like rain and cut grass, not chemicals. I fixed the fence, replaced the damaged boards, and even restained them, just to close the circle. It felt finished. Then one evening, a letter arrived. No return address. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. I unfolded it carefully. You think you can erase me. But the neighborhood remembers. Fences can burn, but hornets always come back. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. I reported it, of course, but there was no trace, no postmark, no fingerprints. The deputy guessed she'd left the letter herself before disappearing for good. A month passed. The HOA elected new officers. Nolan finally looked 10 years younger. The air smelled like barbecue again instead of fear. The fence stood tall, unmarred. But one morning, as I was trimming the hedges, Duke began barking near the far corner of the yard. I followed his gaze, and saw a small hole near the bottom of the fence. Fresh wood dust clung to the edges. For a heartbeat I froze. Then I leaned down, peering through the gap. On the other side, in the weeds where Karen's garden used to be, sat an old, rusted metal canister. Its label was too faded to read, but I could just make out one word, scrawled in black marker: Adler. I didn't touch it. I called the sheriff. They sent someone to collect it, told me it was probably harmless, probably old. But that night, as I sat on the porch watching the sun go down, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still out there somewhere. Waiting, planning, watching from a distance. The wind picked up, carrying the faint hum of insects from the trees. For a split second it almost sounded like buzzing. I smiled to myself, leaned back in my chair, and whispered, "Let them come. Because this time I'd be ready." It's been 6 months since the last time anyone in Maple Creek saw Karen Adler. 6 months of peace that almost feels unnatural, like the air's too still before a storm. The HOA runs smoothly under Nolan, the lawns are green again, and people wave at each other without flinching. You'd think it was all over. But sometimes, when the sun hits the fence just right, I still see faint outlines of the holes she drilled, little scars that haven't quite faded. I didn't realize how much those holes haunted me until last week, when the new neighbors moved into Karen's old house. A young couple from out of state, friendly, polite, normal. They introduced themselves as Derek and Tessa. She had a cheerful voice. He wore a baseball cap and talked about putting in a playset for their toddler. For the first time I felt a sense of relief. Maybe that house could finally stop being the neighborhood's cautionary tale. That night, I stood on my porch with a beer, watching their moving truck unload. The porch light flickered once, just once, and my stomach tightened. I told myself it was nothing. But when I went to bed, I dreamed of buzzing. Not the real sound of hornets. This was louder, deeper, like something electric humming behind the walls. The next morning, I found the first note. It wasn't addressed to me directly, but it had been slipped under my back gate, folded into a neat square. On the front, in blocky handwriting, it said, "Property reminder, respect community standards." Inside was a photocopy of the old HOA rules, Karen's version, with her signature at the bottom. I stood there, staring at the paper, and laughed. It had to be one of the new owners, maybe finding old HOA documents in the house and thinking they were being funny. But later that afternoon, when I went to drop the paper in the trash, I noticed something odd. The ink on the signature wasn't faded, it was fresh. That night, I installed new motion lights around the fence. The next few days were quiet. Then, on Thursday morning, I found 3 small wooden pegs driven into the ground near the corner of the fence. They looked freshly cut, each with a tiny black mark burned into the top. I pulled one out. There was something sticky on the end. Sap? No. Resin. I checked the camera footage. At 2:14 a.m., a figure in a hooded jacket appeared at the edge of the frame. Too far away to make out the face, but the posture, the stiff shoulders, the precise, deliberate movements were unmistakable. I'd seen that walk before. Karen. Only she wasn't supposed to be within 100 feet of my property. I called Deputy Harlan. He arrived within the hour, taking photos and collecting the pegs in plastic bag. Could be nothing, he said, though he didn't sound convinced. But I'll run prints. He paused, glancing at the fence. You ever think about selling this place? I smiled. Not a chance. That night, I double-checked every lock, turned on the cameras, and tried to sleep. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to a faint tapping sound, steady, rhythmic, like knuckles against wood. I sat up, listening. Tap, pause. Tap, tap. Then silence. When I finally gathered the nerve to look outside, nothing moved. The wind was calm, the yard still. But the next morning, when I stepped out to get the mail, I saw them. A dozen new holes drilled along the fence. Perfectly spaced. Perfectly circular. The smell hit me next. Sweet, almost syrupy, but wrong, too heavy, too artificial. I knelt to inspect the wood and noticed a clear, viscous substance seeping from the holes. When I touched it, my fingers came away sticky and faintly yellow. Honey. Or something like it. That evening, Nolan came by to drop off HOA paperwork. He saw me inspecting the fence and frowned. What happened now? I showed him. He whistled low. You sure it's her? I'm not sure of anything anymore, I said. But whoever did this knew exactly where to drill. Right through the boards she weakened last year. He ran his hand along one of the holes. Could be some weird prank. Could be a warning. Nolan looked uneasy. If she's back in town, we'll find out. Her restraining order's still active. I'll check with the sheriff. After he left, I sat outside for a long time, watching the sunset bleed through the fence slats. The air buzzed faintly, not from insects but from nerves. 2 nights later, the hornets came back. It started with one, a single wasp crawling along the deck railing. I swatted it, thinking nothing of it. Then came another. And another. By dusk, there were dozens hovering near the fence, clustering around the drilled holes like they'd been summoned. I couldn't believe it. I grabbed my sprayer and drenched the area, but the next morning the swarm had doubled. Hundreds of hornets now, buzzing furiously, forming a dark halo around the fence line. I called pest control, but the guy on the phone sounded hesitant. Sounds like they've nested in the wood itself, he said. If they've filled the cavities, you'll need to replace the panels. I laughed bitterly. Of course I will. When the exterminator arrived, he took one look at the fence and muttered, whoever drilled those holes knew exactly what they were doing. That night, after he left, I stood in my yard with a flashlight. The hornets were gone, mostly, but a few still circled lazily in the air. And just beyond the fence, in the dark, I caught the faint glint of metal. A camera lens. I didn't hesitate. I vaulted the fence and landed in the weeds on the other side. My light caught something half buried in the dirt, an old trail camera wired to a small battery pack. Someone had been watching, recording. I turned it over and froze. Scratched into the metal casing were 3 words, "Still here, K." I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Harlan came back, collected the camera, and shook his head. If she's really back, she's gotten smarter. No prints. No direct contact. She's keeping distance, using proxies. I'll alert the patrols, but without proof, we can't bring her in. Proof. The word rattled in my head. For the next week, I barely left the house. The neighborhood went about its business as if nothing had happened, but I could feel her ghost in everything. The way the leaves rustled near the fence, the faint chemical tang on the air after rain, the subtle paranoia in every sound. Then came the real twist. One evening, Derek, the new neighbor, knocked on my door holding a small box. "Hey, this was left on our porch," he said. "But it has your name on it." My name was written in the same spidery handwriting as before. I opened it carefully. Inside were 2 things, a USB drive and a Polaroid photo. The photo showed my fence, recently taken, with a single hornet crawling along one of the holes. But in the background, barely visible through the blur, was a figure standing in the trees. The outline was unmistakable. Karen. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. There was only one file, a video clip time-stamped 2 nights ago. The footage was shaky, grainy, filmed from the treeline behind her old property. It showed my yard from a distance, the lights, the motion sensors, even Duke wandering around. Then the camera zoomed in on me, standing by the fence, inspecting the holes. The clip ended abruptly, replaced by text scrawled across the screen in red. "The nest belongs to both of us." I sat there in the dark, the glow of the monitor flickering against my face. I wanted to feel anger or fear or even exhaustion, but what I felt most was something colder. Understanding. Karen wasn't after control anymore. She was after legacy. She wanted to be remembered. So I gave her what she wanted. The next day, I called Nolan, told him I was going to rebuild the fence one last time, but not to worry about permits. I worked for 2 straight days, tearing down every old panel and replacing them with fresh cedar board. Before sealing them, I carved a message along the inside, facing her property line, where only she would ever see it if she came back. You built this war. I finished it. When the last board went up, the yard fell silent. No hornets, no notes, no shadows. Weeks passed. The new neighbors thrived, the HOA stabilized, and life returned to normal, or something close to it. But every now and then, when the wind shifts, I catch the faint scent of sawdust and honey, like the memory of something that refuses to die. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear that soft, familiar tapping on the wood. 3 beats. Then silence. Maybe it's just the wind. Maybe it's the fence settling. Or maybe, somewhere out there in the dark, Karen Adler is still watching, waiting for her turn to strike again. But if she ever does, she'll find out the hard way what she created on the other side of that fence. Because I'm not her victim anymore. I'm the keeper of the nest now. And the hornets? They remember her too.